So, after a lot of requests and anticipation, we're back working on one of the most extreme projects I've ever taken on, building an entire underground kingdom inside this enormous cave. Last time we laid out the foundations for the project by creating this huge cave and filling it with stalagmites and stalactites. We then gave it a little bit of colour by scattering in some glowing mushrooms, made a path throughout the cave and connected it together with some bridges, leading to the main castle at the back of the cave. Also, your guys' interaction last time was outstanding, and we absolutely crushed the like goal. So this time, let's get the video to 30k likes. Make sure to comment down below some of your suggestions, and if this video gets to 30k likes, then you'll have a chance for some of them to get included in the build. After looking back over the previous video, I took on your guys' suggestions and combined them with a few of my own. I decided the best place to start was by adding a little light. So, to start things off, we headed to the top of the cave, which reaches world height by the way, and started to chisel away, etching in a crack that reaches across the majority of the cave ceiling, starting from the tip of the castle where the beacon hits the rock, to act as if it's been cut all the way through and has split open the top of the cave. And as you can see, it's pretty big. Now that I'd sketched in the pattern up top, I was able to carve a way through the rest of the rock, so that it spiderwebs out from the main crevice, letting in a little more light to spread throughout the cave. I know that some of you suggested this idea to let a little bit of natural light leak in, and I had to agree. Doing this not only helps to lighten things up a little bit, but also makes the build more appealing rather than a dark grey wasteland. To finish the massive crevice, I added some long hanging foliage cascading down into the cave. I wanted to create the impression that nature was creeping into the cave and the outside environment was claiming it back. As you can see, I've made my way outside to the back of the cave to work on a flat wall. I did this to start making several clusters of glowing crystals. A lot of you seem to like the multicoloured glowing mushrooms that I previously made and scattered around the cave floor. And I wanted to add some crystal shards protruding from the rock faces, so I thought, why not make them glow a little bit as well while I'm at it. I tried to make enough variations in the size of the shards and the amount in each cluster. If I didn't, things might start looking a little bit repetitive using the same crystal around the cave walls. With the colourful glowing crystal clusters done, I decided I would add them to the back of the cave, prioritising the rock face beneath the castle and gradually having them disperse out in each direction. Pasting in each cluster took a little tweaking to make them sit flush with the wall, but once I scattered enough crystals around and got a nice mixture of different angles and sizes, I finished things off by adding a light dusting of the same purple and magenta stained glass around in the rock, to hint at smaller shards within the rock as well. Now, I decided to include this clip as it was my initial attempt at producing a human statue. However, if you can't already tell, I severely underestimated the size of this vast cavernous space, and made the statue way too small. So, it was time to scrap it and start afresh. Sometimes your build might not look quite right and might require a little trial and error until you manage to get the ball rolling. So, I restarted and began sculpting the statue on a larger scale. I blocked out the torso and arms roughly to get an idea of positioning, before moving on and focusing on the head. If you haven't guessed it already, I decided to base this statue off of the Atlas globe statue, similarly to the Atlas statue that I made when transforming PewDiePie's Minecraft base. This one, however, was on a much larger scale, and at a slightly different pose. Because of the positioning of this version of Atlas, however, it made things rather difficult, not only with proportioning body parts, but working at different angles, specifically when creating the head. I really struggled to get proper facial structure when working on that angle. So I decided to build the head on a normal axis and, once done, rotate it on a 45-degree angle. And from there I can make adjustments where needed. Even after doing all of this, however, it still wasn't looking exactly how I imagined. So after a lot of tweaking, I finally pasted in the newly created head back onto the torso of the statue. With the head positioned on the body, I began tweaking the existing body parts I previously created. I repositioned and changed the angle of the forearm slightly, making it so that the hands roughly match the same height level as the top of his head. I then continued to etch away at his body, attempting to chisel out his torso further, adding muscles and definition where it should reside on the actual human anatomy, meaning I even defined his ribcage and spine. I then brought forward one of his thighs and began making the legs. The front leg positioned at about 45-degree angle, with the behind leg tucked under as if he's sitting back on his heel. The hardest part when making a statue in a dynamic pose such as this one is figuring out its centre of mass. so that it makes logical sense to support the weight and balance of the character, and make sure that everything is in proportion, of course. I finish up with the second leg and make some slight tweaks here and there until I get a final version that I'm happy with. Instead of having Atlas support and hold up the globe like it usually would, as it does in the reference image, I wanted to have him appear man-made, etched out of a large pillar of stone, and in doing so, making it look like he's holding up the ceiling of the cave. Now, it took some adjusting of course, but once I got the statue in place, I copied and mirrored him over to the other side of the bridge, mimicking him holding up the pillar of stone. Now, I toyed with the idea for a while, but I wasn't sure how I wanted it to end up looking. Originally, I was going to have it carved out of a stalagmite and mix in some mossy and cobblestone blocks, but after a while I thought it looked best having it reside on a simple, clean stone pillar. This way, it also made the statue appear as if it had been hammered and chiselled out of the solid pillar by sculptors. And once that was done, I simply mirrored it over to the other side once more. Due to the massive fissure in the cave ceiling and the natural light leaking in, I wanted to include some Mother Nature and greenery in the area where the light reaches. So I include the one and only tree that managed to grow deep in the cave. Because this was going to be the only tree, I decided it had to be a nice tree. So I built up a custom trunk and made some main branches which spread off into all sorts of different directions. And from there I built up many more smaller branches. I deliberately built the tree leaning slightly into the area exposed by natural light, as if reaching out for some sunlight. Using an assortment of leaves, I finished off the tree and repositioned it, before adding a few hanging lanterns to help lighten things up a little bit and add to the fantasy vibe. Lastly, I began laying out a path connecting the bridges up and laying down some grass to cover the area. I wanted to make a few slight changes to the design of the castle, as I wanted the design to carry over to some of the main buildings in the kingdom. So I changed the main material from stone to white concrete and swapped out all of the dark oak roofs for dark prismarine roofs instead, to again improve the fantasy factor. Plus, I think it just helps by adding a bit more colour to fit the future theme of this build. So, previously I left this area a flat, clean slate, but now it's time to fill it out with a little village. If you hadn't realised already, I'm going for an elvish style to all of the buildings so far and the main castle as well. So all of these village houses are styled and themed the same, using the same white concrete, stone bricks, dark oak wood and dark prismarine to match the castle. Because there isn't much space to work with on this raised platform, I wanted each of these buildings to be custom made and unique, while still all containing a little personality and character to match. This building style is very different to how I usually work, so it was a challenge to create interesting designs for each house, without them looking like a generic rustic or medieval house. I needed to break up the solid grass plains, so I forked off some slightly thinner paths in different directions. The goal of these paths is so that they lead to the edge of the platform and it will bridge off to each of the surrounding large stalagmites with a select few buildings on each to extend the reach of the village. With the paths mapped out, it was time to create some more building designs as I attempted working in even more styles, creating circular windows and gradually sloping roofs. Doing this made the buildings turn out really unique and like nothing I've ever done before. For any of the buildings that had any clean slate walls, I scattered around some more leaf blocks to act as vines and foliage, to once again signify nature claiming this small section of the cave that's getting sunlight. To add a bit more building variety, I decided to make a little outdoor public gazebo between this fork in the road, as the space was too small for a house, and this way it keeps it very open and doesn't feel too compact. Once done, I made a small bench in front of the large oak tree, and then began building a regular house. However, once complete, I would then rotate it on a slight angle to fit the long but thin gap that remained on the left side of the path. Of course, once done, I had to go around and neaten it up a little bit, but after that I placed around some lampposts around the village to lighten up the dark areas. After, I worked on another special building, and keeping to the same glass dome theme that some of the other buildings have, decided to make a greenhouse. I played around with the concept of the stained glass windows, but in the end decided to keep it all white glass, and instead I would fill the inside with colourful plants, as I didn't want it to clash with the colourful glass and it would make it look too messy. I again neatened things up and added some more foliage around the outskirts, before moving on to another custom diagonal building. However, this time, instead of building it straight and rotating it, I decided to just build it on the diagonal axis. This can be a little tricky at first. In fact, it can be a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle if all the pieces didn't fit together and were slightly slanted. But for the final building, I did end up copying over one of the other building designs I previously made. However, when I pasted in the building, it was just hanging off the cliff slightly. So I decided to make that a new feature of the build by adding supports that jut out of the rock face to hold up and support the building. I ended up tweaking other parts to still make it unique from the other by changing the roofs and some of the main features. Lastly, I made a little well on the edge of the path and scattered around some more foliage. Now, let's see what we've done so far. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. We've made a lot of progress on this build so far, but if you want any of your suggestions to be included in the next video, then make sure you get this video to 30k likes. If it does, that might just happen. Apart from that, thank you all so much for the support. We've actually just hit 500k subs, so 500,000 of you have decided to subscribe to me, which is, it still baffles me. And honestly, I don't think that's ever going to change. I'm always going to find it shocking how so many of you guys watch me. Anyway, as always, make sure you check out my socials. I'll leave them linked down below. Go give them a follow. And apart from that, I'll see you next time.